Hello and welcome everyone, we Weeb online and today I'm gonna start a new movie, What If Fem Madara Was Obsessed with Naruto Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
If the figure currently descending from the sky at near terminal velocity knew anything, it was one thing. Pain. Pure, unadulterated pain. It was difficult to think, but Naruto Uzumaki was of sound mind enough to realize he was on a collision course with the earth below. Trying to muster any kind of strength was difficult when the wind slicing into his skin was strong enough to steal his breath. But he tried anyway. As he continued his descent, numb from the heavy loss of chakra and blood, he could feel himself becoming cold, but his desire to live proved too strong. The ground grew closer as he reached for strength once more, dredging the absolute bottom of his once limitless pools of energy for whatever vital scraps he could muster. It wasn't enough to stop the pain, nor would it suffice for even the most basic techniques, but it would suffice. He braced for impact, reinforcing his body as best he could, and almost as soon as he wrapped the last of his energy around his body like a paper-thin cloak, the earth gave way beneath him. An explosive shock wave splintered from the velocity generated by the body and cratered as kinetic energy and chakra transferred outward, disrupting the once peaceful silence for miles around the epicenter. The blonde man, now covered in blood, dust, and stones, would have died from the severe impact if it was possible to be even more miserable than he had been previously. His life essence was rapidly leaving his body and spilling onto the rubble he was attempting to push himself out of, and he quickly discovered the source of his leak. His lack of a right arm greeted him as he attempted to use a limb that didn't exist, flopping onto his right side as his left arm carried out the task his brain had assigned to both limbs. Naruto's pupils contracted to pinpricks as he stared at the heinous wound, the now identified source of pain, something he knew Kurama couldn't simply fix, keeping his host body alive while healing a punctured heart burned by thousands of volts of electricity. Sure, growing something as complex as an arm from the ground up, he questioned his furry friend's ability to perform the miracle. The nature of his wound finally kicking in was what jolted his mind enough to form a coherent string of thoughts. Kurama, the blonde, intoned weakly, almost incapable of doing so as his vision began to fade around the edges, only to be revived by a burst of foreign but familiar chakra to keep him awake. However, there was no verbal response. What in the world happened? It took him a few seconds of concentration to bring his recent memories to the forefront of his mind, and he felt his warm blood run cold as a result. He remembered the Fourth Shinobi War and everything it entailed, including the revelation of Obaido's true identity, Madara Uchiha's resurrection and death, Kaguya, and, finally, his battle with Sasuke at the Valley of the End. Naruto realized only after his scattered mind went over the final moments leading up to his impromptu skydive. He had been defeated. He had lost his final battle against Sasuke despite the odds and the devil's luck on his side. His opponent had used his faith, his trust, against him, and Naruto had paid the price for acting on instinct rather than logic. Sasuke had ripped the last bit of Kurama's purified chakra from Naruto's chest and used it to open a rift with his Rin Sharingan, using his chakra siphoning ability once more. Without saying anything, Sasuke kicked his blonde brother through the rift and sealed it shut almost as quickly as it came, and with the rift closed, the fate of the entire world was sealed. Grinning, the blonde Jinchuriki attempted to push himself to his feet once more, this time keeping his missing right arm in mind as he shifted his center of gravity to his mostly unharmed left side. It took some time for his muscles to respond, but after nearly a minute of effort, the blonde shinobi was finally able to stand. Panting heavily and on the verge of blacking out, the blonde cast a tired gaze around him, trying to figure out where he was. The sight of upturned trees, stones, and earthen walls surrounding the crater he created upon impact was all that greeted him, with no indication of where he was. He was aware that the Valley of the End marked the boundary between the Land of Fire and the Land of Rice, but he had no idea where Sasuke's technique would lead him. Sasuke had used the same technique as Kaguya, one that could transport the user to various dimensions. If there was one way to ensure that his opponent could never fight him again, it was to leave him stranded somewhere he had no hope of ever returning from. The grim reality of his situation began to sink in once more, and the heavily wounded shinobi almost succumbed to the agony he felt right then and there. Fighting for his life, the blonde gave his immediate surroundings another blurred once-over in an attempt to recognize even the most vaguely familiar of sights. The only thing he knew for sure was that the trees looked familiar, so he had a feeling he was somewhere in the Land of Fire. But other than that, he had nothing to go on. Do you have any idea where we are, Kurama? Naruto tried again to send his thoughts inward to the Biju living within his gut, but he received nothing but silence in return. Naruto took a step forward and stumbled as the ground beneath him gave way, causing him to roll his ankle and eat dirt for the umpteenth time in the previous 20 minutes. He reached out to catch himself before falling and was reminded of his current lack of a right arm, forcing him to collapse on the still bleeding stump and scream into the dirt in agony. His screams eventually died away, and darkness completely took over his mind, but not before he faintly registered 2 foreign chakra signatures touching down just outside his crater. He claimed to have felt chakra signatures just a few hours before. Madara Uchiha had had a rather dull day. It began, as most of her days had in the previous year, with irritation, yelling, and brooding. Madara found herself thrust into the position of acting leader of the Uchiha clan, with all that entailed, following the death of her father at her hands no less. The 3 P's of a good shinobi are paperwork, politics, and planning espionage. Power, prestige, and a fantastic lover would have to wait because those were the 3 she was expecting. She had begun to regret her decision to commit patricide almost as soon as she had made it. Despite her desire to lead her clan, she did not enjoy sitting in a stuffy room all day, so she found herself wandering the countryside of the Land of Fire late in the afternoon with no particular destination in mind. Negotiating a better price on steel imported from the Land of Iron had taken far longer than she had planned, and the merchant selling the ingots had proven to be a pig in more ways than one during his brief visit. She fought the shiver that threatened to quake her spine in revulsion, focusing instead on anything and everything else on her mind to distract her. Madara was taking advantage of the current ceasefire between the Senju and Uchiha to try to calm her inner turmoil over the ongoing harassment she faced from her counterpart and rival, Hashirama Senju. There was nothing vulgar about it, but it was still harassment. Izumi Uchiha, her beloved little sister and only remaining sibling, fought tooth and nail to persuade Madara otherwise, but the elder of the two was gradually coming to realize that Hashirama was more right than wrong in his strong beliefs, especially when he went out of his way time and time again to prove himself and his ideals to her. This most recent ceasefire demonstrated this. Why, indeed, did the Uchiha and Senju continue to fight each other when both sides had long forgotten why they were fighting? As things stood, Madara was relieved not to have to watch the young of her mighty clan fall before another in battle, or to muster dozens of fighters to secure a front that would shift again in a month or so. For once, Madara could focus on issues other than their most despised foe, and make headway in implementing her own changes within her clan. Much like Hashirama had done when he succeeded his father as Senju ruler. She wasn't much of a public speaker, but her zeal and ferocious combat ability made her an ideal figure for the Uchiha to rally around, and even the most venomous members of her clan knew better than to cross her. She was confident that if she fought hard enough, she could persuade enough of her clansmen of her and Hashirama's dream of peace to silence the rest of her violent relatives. Madara was so preoccupied with how to even bring up the subject with her clan members at large that the sound of what appeared to be an explosion in the distance passed her by. She was forced to pay attention to the distant noise, however, when a shock wave of displaced air washed over her seconds later, forcing her to grit her teeth and apply chakra to her feet to better stick to the ground. Madara changed her course from north to east as soon as the shock wave passed, and she began to speed towards what she assumed was the source of the explosion. Her eyes bled crimson as the Sharingan awoke within her once coal-black pupils, 3 Tamos spinning quickly around her pupil as she scanned the environment for signs of enemy combatants. During her quick travel, the only chakra sources she could detect were those of small animals and woodland creatures roaming the forests below. Madara, like most shinobi in the densely forested Hai no Kuni, traveled near the treetops and leapt from one branch to another to gain a better vantage point of the surroundings. Madara braced herself for a fight as she approached the location she suspected was the epicenter of the explosion, her suspicion growing as she got closer. The trees in the area around her reminded her of a time when she and Hashirama would gather at the stream below her to skip rocks and swim. She paused for a moment to look at the stream, happy memories flashing through her mind before the young matriarch pushed them away, and returned her attention to the present. Madara found herself drawing a kunai and pooling her chakra behind her eyes to push her Sharingan into the next stage, all thoughts of Hashirama and her past pushed aside. With the Mangekyo erupting, she was able to pinpoint the source of the disturbance as well as what appeared to be a fading chakra signature within a chakra-laden crater. Leaping forward one more time, the armored ninja came to rest on one of the top branches of a tree standing at the crater's edge. It wasn't close enough to the river to form a basin, but she was confident that nature would take care of the rest. She determined that the figure laying near the center of the crater was indeed on the verge of death now that she was close enough to get a good look. A small flame of chakra remained lit within his reserves, while a different blend of energy appeared to congregate heavily on his right side, near his shoulder and upper arm. His chakra was new to her, but something about it piqued her interest. Perhaps it was the strange coloration, or the way it began to grow in size and strength as she watched. But Madara soon found herself leaping down to the crater's edge to get a better look. Under closer inspection, the ebony-haired Uchiha's normally neutral expression was marred by a frown. The figure in the crater appeared to have been run through by hell multiple times. He was lying face down in the dirt, but not quite in the center of the crater. The heavily wounded blonde, or at least she assumed he was a blonde beneath all of the blood and grime from the few patches of yellow she could see, had not only caused the crater she was now standing in with his body, but he had also stood up and attempted to walk away. An impact powerful enough to cause the crater she was now in would have killed any other shinobi she knew besides herself, Izumi, Hashirama, and his white-haired dick of a brother, Tobirama. Around that time, she noticed the garish stump of his right arm, which was still slowly leaking blood into the soil beneath him. So, not only did this man fall from the sky and hit the ground at terminal velocity, only to attempt to walk away from it, but he did so while severely injured and having recently lost a limb. Madara was probably better off killing the poor bastard before he recovered any further, not only to ensure one less potential enemy in the world, but also to put him out of his obviously miserable situation. Anyone who could survive a beating like the one this man clearly received had to be a monster. She held her hand back, and instead of severing the wounded man's spine with her kunai, she rolled him over to face the sky to get a better look at it and hopefully identify him. The ebony-haired warrior tried to ignore the massive swelling on his left cheek, instead trying to identify the blonde by going over the notable shinobi of the many clans that called Hai no Kuni home. Despite her efforts, she couldn't say for certain that she had ever seen him before in her life, which bothered her. If there was one thing Madara took pride in, it was knowing her enemies almost as well as her allies. This man did not appear to be one of her enemies, and he was clearly not an ally. Madara was certain she remembered someone with such adorable little whisker marks. Once again, the current leader of the Uchiha clan was conflicted about her decision. Did she kill the man before he could become a threat, let him die naturally, or did she take a chance and return him to the Uchiha compound to heal? Torn between two options, Madara bit her lower lip and returned her gaze to the wounded but endearingly cute whiskers visible beneath flakes of dried mud and blood. Her decision was made for her when she sensed a chakra signature approaching from the west, a direction she knew would eventually take her near the Senju encampment if she traveled far enough. Madara weighed her options again, this time with the Senju in mind, biting her lower lip harder as a result of the sudden pressure she felt to make a decision. If they, the Senju clan, were to blame for this man's wounds, it cast him in a slightly more opportunistic light for her. The enemy of my enemy is still my enemy's enemy, but that didn't rule out the possibility of using the injured man as a bargaining chip in the future. If he was enemies with the Senju, she might be able to persuade him to form an alliance if he survives his wounds. If he isn't, Madara taking him with her will keep the wounded man out of their hands, which could work in her favor. Madara decided to scoop him up and hold him against her chest almost as if he were a child, mostly to keep her movements from jarring his wounds too much. Ignoring the warm blood and grime soaking into her shirt sleeves, the Uchiha matriarch pumped as much chakra into her body as it could handle and raced back to her clan's home at near breakneck speed, narrowly missing the group of Senju sent to investigate by a wide margin. This decision, to spare a life to spite her enemies, would forever alter the course of the shinobi world as they knew it, though she would never realize it. A week. Madara's unknown visitor had been unconscious for a week. Smuggling him into the compound had been relatively simple, as she had navigated the darkness and used her familiar chakra signal to announce her arrival before they would bother investigating. Being the leader of the Uchiha gave her a bit more leeway in the rules than the rest, given that she was the ultimate enforcer of said rules at the end of the day. They would serve at her command, just as her father had done when he was clan head before her. Madara didn't waste time undressing him to get a better look at his injuries before cleaning his wounds, body, and hair of dried muck, rubble, and blood. She was taken aback by how quickly he had healed in the few miles between the Uchiha compound and the crater she discovered him in. The difference in the mangled and fried mess, the stump where his right arm used to be visible to the naked eye. His heartbeat had also grown faintly stronger, proving that his will to live was far too strong to be snuffed out even by the severe injuries he bore. It was one of the most intriguing experiences Madara had ever had, both as a person and as a shinobi. One does not simply survive catastrophic damage and then attempt to limp away without tremendous willpower and physical strength, let alone heal at a rate that would have taken her weeks in the span of about 20 minutes. Oh, his chakra. It was something else entirely. She could compare it to Hashirama's, but it wouldn't do her mysterious guest justice. Madara was never a fan of colorful displays, believing that they were pointless because beauty did not equate to survival for the strong. His chakra was a deep, oceanic blue at its core, vast in size, strength, and density. After only one day of rest, he had more chakra concentrated in his body than she had previously thought possible, and at the rate it was growing, it was likely only a quarter of his reserves at best. Shades of green, orange, yellow, and red emerged from the depths of the ocean, all in varying sizes and working in different capacities, according to what she could decipher with the Sharingan. As she cleaned his wounds and burned away the impurities with alcohol concentrates, reddish-orange chakra with hints of blue sprung forth within his damaged network and began to heal everything it touched with precision she had never seen before. Within 2 hours of cleaning the wound of loose debris, his right arm, or what was left of it, had healed completely. Such an event should not have been possible, and if someone had told her about it in passing, she would have scoffed and dismissed it as hearsay. Madara could safely say that her understanding of chakra had grown as his body healed, showing her new ways to shape her own life force and chakra in ways that vitalized her like no cup of tea could, like an unconscious medical tutor. His face and body had started to heal as soon as it was clear that his life was no longer in danger, though Madara had a good idea of what he would look like before it started. She was not disappointed. His cheeks showed signs of little fat, indicating that he was approaching maturity, though she could only guess. The wounded blonde was a sight to behold beneath the swelling, blood, and grime that covered his features. His whiskers looked more like birthmarks than tattoos to her, as there was no ink on his body except for a strangely complicated seal on his stomach that she couldn't make heads or tails of, and the palm of his left hand. His stomach and left hand both held chakra concentrations that far exceeded her understanding of sealing, and both appeared to be symbiotic with his own chakra. It was revolutionary, dare she say, in the way his body contained so many nuances and quirks. Her chakra only had 3 distinct characteristics that were related to her natural chakra alignments and bloodline. His was beyond her comprehension. An entire week under her Mangekyo's gaze had been enlightening, and an entire week under her tender caress as she cleaned and visually dissected his body had emboldened her. His mere presence compelled her to go out of her way to keep him comfortable while he healed, acting as a natural stress reliever in a way. She had asked him questions even while unconscious, as if he would hear and understand. His silence was telling, but she swears his chakra would respond in ways that unconsciousness couldn't. It would flare up as she cleaned him, only to settle after a few minutes of pressing a soft, wet rag against his body. Madara would take her time with the process, first cleaning him with water and then applying oils specific to her clan to aid in his healing and chakra regeneration, even if it appeared completely unnecessary. She mostly spoke when she was cleaning him. At first, she would ask him questions while carefully watching his chakra, hoping to elicit what she assumed were unconscious responses to external stimuli. Then she'd tell me about her day and everything that had happened. She didn't reveal anything too important about her clan's inner workings, only her grievances with rebellious children and adult children who refused to obey, and later the elders of the clan who had thrived under her father. Many saw her as unfit to lead, mostly because of her gender, but also because of her recent leniency in not breaking the peace between the Senju and Uchiha before their rivals could. Such proposals had been shot down every time they arose, which had recently become almost daily. Madara did not want to be the one to break the so-called truce for the time being, but instead used it to her advantage to not only better arm her clansmen, but also to better prepare them for the impending battle. If that conflict occurred the next day or a year later, Madara would be damn sure they were prepared. She felt a spike in his chakra on the 7th day after the unknown blonde's rescue, denoting his consciousness once more springing to life, causing her to stop complaining as she stood and put a few feet between the two in case things became hostile. She knew she was taking a risk by assisting an unknown and obviously powerful shinobi in his recovery within her own home. But something about his chakra and its calm but powerful presence spoke volumes about his character before his words or actions could. His ocean blue eyes opened and his once immobile body began to lean forward, the woven wool blanket covering his body falling away to his lap as he did so. It didn't take long for his gaze to fall on Madara's, and she nearly took another step back in surprise at what she saw bubbling beneath the surface. Naruto Uzumaki had been injured. It wasn't so much physical pain as emotional pain, as his and Kurama's chakra took care of his injuries within hours of sustaining them. Deep emotional pain threatened to reincarnate his inner darkness and disrupt his inner peace. Despite his body going unconscious, his mind did not become comatose and instead retreated inwards, to the domain he had created within his seal to house the souls and chakra of the 9 Biju. He sobbed beneath the protective embrace of his now closest and only friend, if the shade of his Biju partner could be called a friend. Whatever Sasuke had done had left only a ghost of his partner within the seal, reliant on his own chakra to exist and eventually rekindle. They would have died from the wounds that Sasuke had left on Naruto's body if it hadn't been for their mastery of senjutsu. To say the least, it had been a long week for the two. Naruto took his time coming to terms with his loss, knowing the technique used on him well enough to know his chances of returning home were slim to none. Not only did he lack the Rin Sharingan, which was required for dimension hopping, but he also had no idea how he would even begin to pinpoint the exact dimension that was his. After the first day of his consciousness retreating from his physical body to reside within the seal on his stomach, he and Kurama had long and hard talked about it. The only certainty the two had was that whatever dimension he found himself in had trees, rocks, dirt, and breathable air. If this dimension had trees, it almost certainly had water, so Naruto's chances of survival were better than if Sasuke had sent them to one of the many more volatile dimensions they knew existed. That was all they had from the outside world until the second day of their recuperation. The only thing they could be certain of from the outside world until Naruto regained consciousness was that his wounds had been cleaned, but he was still in danger due to his body's condition. By the second day, whoever was caring for him had begun to dress his wounds and apply some kind of oil, which assisted the two in drawing an ambient senjutsu chakra at a slightly faster rate. It was a surprise, but they took advantage of it nonetheless. Despite his melancholy, the blonde had entered a meditative trance to assist Kurama in gathering chakra in order to hasten his recovery. While Naruto had no idea how to actively use his chakra to heal, Kurama had a good idea because both of their chakras were naturally healing. With the assistance of their enigmatic companion, the two were able to gather enough chakra from the surrounding area to replenish nearly a quarter of Naruto's reserves, with the remainder going to help Kurama. They couldn't take too much, though, because it would activate his physical body and raise questions that neither of them wanted to answer to their benefactor, at least not until they were certain they could trust them. Their benefactor's presence was both a blessing and a source of concern. They had, in fact, aided their recovery and prevented them from being further injured by the chakra sources they could faintly feel around them, like a distant ringing that they couldn't pinpoint. Their presence, on the other hand, confirmed not only the existence of a chakra-wielding species in a world with naturally occurring processes required for life to exist. They were both aware of what the presence of foreign chakra meant. Shinobi. They found themselves in a world where Hagoromo had split his mother's chakra and dispersed it among the natural population of humans. This meant they were in a dimension where Kaguya was likely to have existed as well, if the dimensions were similar with only minor differences. However, the odds were so slim that the two had chosen that as their least likely explanation. However, they wouldn't and couldn't know until they awoke. That is, until the 4th day. By that point, the two had gathered enough ambient chakra in nature to facilitate around 4 taels worth of chakra for the Biju, which was far more than either could have ever hoped to recover without whatever oils were being applied to their bodies. However, whoever was assisting the two did not appear to be aware of their tremendous growth, as it was all done behind a seal that few could see and even fewer could comprehend, should they be in a dimension where Fuinjutsu had never been discovered. While this is possible, neither Naruto nor Kurama bet on it. However, it wasn't until the 4th day of their recovery that their benefactor began to speak. Naruto was barely connected to his body at the time to fully comprehend the garbled whispers that echoed within the seal antechamber spaces, but Kurama was. Kurama had spent his entire life learning to decipher the world around him in the presence of seals far stronger than the one that was currently holding him within Naruto's body. The whispers had grown louder over the days, as had the cause for concern between the two. Their benefactor posed numerous questions, many of which could not be answered without jeopardizing who they were before they knew it was safe. The majority of them lingered on what Naruto was capable of, probing questions with no real weight behind them because the person asking them was well aware there would be no response. Kurama could tell by their tone of voice that they were females, whoever they were. That was all they had to go on, aside from the fact that their benefactor might as well be a captor, and that her efforts were both benign and dangerous. You know, you can wake up whenever you want, Kurama said almost boredomly, his still growing body lying down with his forelegs crossed beneath his chin. We both know that's not a good idea right now, Naruto said, not displaying his usual zeal or exuberance since his defeat at the hands of his spiritual brother, and you said the person taking care of me is strong, right? There is no doubt about it. Whoever they are familiar. I know that chakra from somewhere, but I can't really put a face to it, Kurama admitted with a snort, concern visible in his voice despite his efforts to mask it with sarcasm. They could be a survivor from the war, though. I want to say that our captor is a Uchiha. Their chakra certainly feels like a Uchiha's. That knowledge was also a major source of concern between them. Naruto had no desire to go throwing himself at a powerful Uchiha until he had recovered from his injuries. Naruto was far from his peak during the war, with a missing arm and chakra reserves still less than half full, not to mention a weakened Kurama. In Naruto's opinion, the presence of the Yang seal, the mirror of the Yin seal that Sasuke wore, was the only consolation to their current weakness. The seal was more than skin deep, and his missing right arm wouldn't stop him from using the abilities that came with it. With the shape I'm in right now, I can only use Sage Mode for a few minutes at most, Naruto admitted after a few moments of trying to understand and measure the amount of chakra currently present within his body, which he found far more difficult than when he was conscious. That would be enough to get away, but I'd be on fumes after that. It's still too risky, if I'm guessing correctly. It'll be another month before we're both back to full strength, and even then. Kurama looked at Naruto's right arm. Knowing that his representation within the seal was not congruent with his actual body, you'd have to fight them off left-handed and without a good few of your jutsu. This was Naruto's most pressing concern, one that he believed would have long-term consequences for him. There was nothing Kurama could do to regrow an arm, which the blonde had accepted without fuss because there was no point in fussing. Crying, screaming, and moping were unlikely to get him his arm back. His resident Biju had suggested constantly creating an arm out of either his own or Kurama's chakra, which Naruto thought was a good idea and perhaps his only real option until he could figure out if a prosthetic was even possible. Given his skill with shaping chakra, which was among the best in the world thanks to experience and the presence of the Yang seal, this would be a non-issue for him in most cases. He couldn't use a chakra construct to perform his hand seals, so he'd be limited in his techniques until he could practice his one-handed seals. Outside of Kage Bunshin and possibly Kawarami if he had enough time to concentrate, Rasengan and its many variants were all he had to rely on. What are the chances that whoever is helping me will try to kill me? Naruto pondered after a few more moments of silence, carefully considering his options. Where do we even go? There is no Konoha here, at least I don't think there will be. It still hurt to think about his situation, so he did his best to keep it in the back of his mind during his recovery. It didn't bode well for his mental state that he was actively recognizing and admitting that his chances of returning home to see his many friends and comrades in arms were practically nil. Sasuke didn't mess up his jutsu, and with the Rin Sharingan and all of its abilities, perfectly replicating Kaguya's technique wasn't out of his skill range. I don't know, brat, Kurama finally admitted, his voice fading from room shaking to barely audible enough to make a pebble bounce. We'll figure something out, just focus on resting while we can. The blonde had fallen into a trance-like sleep as he focused his attention on gathering and filtering the senjutsu present in the world around them through his stomach seal. Naruto's body was deemed fit enough to support himself in a fight after 7 days of resting and allowing himself to be cared for by the two. The plan was simple, if identifying and escaping their captor could be considered simple. If whoever they were turned out to be a Uchiha, the blonde shinobi and his Biju partner were in for a fight. Kurama had long admitted to despising the Sharingan for its ability to mentally enslave him, and Naruto had inherited his fear as a result. If their captor managed to enslave Kurama via the seal, both of them would be in big trouble. You ready, brat? Kurama inquired as he observed Naruto mentally preparing himself for the first time since losing his arm. You look nervous, Kurama added. Well, yeah, Naruto admitted after a few seconds of thought. Knowing that lying about his feelings to the ultimate emotional censor was pointless, I really don't want to get in another fight right after waking up, you know. Kurama scoffed but nodded his head in agreement. You and I both, brat. I think we've fought enough in the last month to last a few decades. Just say the word, and I'll get Sage Mode ready, the Biju said, settling his humanoid shape into the lotus position, both hands near where his navel would be. Thank you, Kurama. Wish me luck. With that said, Naruto's mental representation began to fade from the seal, a purely symbolic visual process. Take care, Naruto. Kurama couldn't help but be concerned for both his host and himself. The questions posed by his captive. The Biju shivered at the ideas formed by the questions, and instead asked why such a thing would be asked in the first place. Not only was he concerned about Naruto's life, but also about his chastity. As ebony eyes met ocean blue, Madara felt her heart flutter in her chest. Her visitor appeared far more alert than a man who had been sleeping for 7 days had any right to be, his body only sluggishly following behind the obvious order to assume a defensive position, if slightly raising his knees and squaring his jaw could be considered defensive. Fear, anger, confusion, and, dare she say, recognition were all visible to her, though the latter was only faint if she could guess his expression. Ah, you're finally awake. I'm glad, Madara said, placing a hand on her hip and cocking it slightly, a position that would allow her to lash out with a devastating snap kick despite appearing casual in nature. I was afraid you'd pass out before I could even ask you your name. Naruto blinked twice at the tone Uchiha clearly took with him, noting her appearance as he tore his gaze away from theirs to give their body a cursory once-over. Her long, black hair was styled in an obviously familiar way, covering her right eye and allowing only the left to peek through wild ebony locks. Her face was thin but beautifully shaped, with what appeared to be porcelain skin. Her eyes were full of fire, to say the least, and the blonde sensed something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Loose black robes draped over a slim figure, barely covering her bandage-covered breasts. Long, creamy legs peeked out from beneath the loose robe tied tightly around the waist, long enough to cover only what was required for decency, and nothing else. Naruto returned his gaze to her face, hoping to keep it from roving her body again. He could feel a slight trickle of something on his upper lip, which made him realize his nose was running. He wouldn't say it out loud, but the woman he was looking at was one of the most beautiful Naruto had ever seen. Something about her slender body, wild hair, and equally threatening gaze roused something in him that he only vaguely recognized. Only after another few moments of staring at her face did he begin to piece together puzzle pieces in his head that didn't quite make sense. The hair, the dark circles under their eyes, their assured demeanor. The woman in front of Naruto reminded him of Madara Uchiha in every way, from appearance to attitude. The cocky smirk that most Uchiha were likely born with present on her, dare he say, beautiful face. He couldn't help but stutter that name in confusion because he couldn't be certain until he confirmed his suspicion. Are you, Madara? Naruto struggled to form his words, due in part to a week's lack of use of his vocal cords and in part to his shock. When the woman in front of him nodded silently, Naruto looked down at his blanket-covered waist, scrunched his brows together in confusion, and then back up at her face. Is this what Jiraiya-sensei referred to as a hate boner? Madara couldn't help but smile when she saw the trail of blood leaking from her guest's nose. It wasn't quite the reaction she had hoped for, but it was certainly encouraging. She could see the rage in his eyes, as well as the depths of his pain. But he clearly still had some kind of spark within him, as he raised his legs slightly to hide more rebellious body functions from her prying eyes. Madara chose not to comment, instead giving the enigmatic man a few more moments of silence after he received the answer he sought. It was odd that her visitor referred to her as Madara rather than Madara Uchiha, most feared shinobi in the Land of Fire. It implied some level of familiarity, as he clearly knew who she was. Another point to mention is her obvious lack of fear of her visitor. He didn't seem scared of her as he pushed himself to a sitting position with his only remaining upper limb. You obviously know who I am, but I'm still curious as to whom I've been tending to over the past week, Madara finally said, realizing she wouldn't be the first to break the silence. His brow furrowed even more and his eyes glowed with confusion, as if he didn't understand how she didn't know his name. Or perhaps he was wondering why she would have healed him instead of killing him in his injured state. You seriously don't know who I am, do you? Her blonde guest finally said, posing a question. It was an odd way to respond to being asked for his identity, and it reminded Madara of something else. He had the impression that she should have known his name, which was yet another indication that she had made a mistake by inviting him into her home. Obviously not. Please enlighten me, Madara snarked back, unable to keep the slight heat from her tone as her stance shifted slightly more aggressively. Her visitor had to suppress a trickle of blood attempting to escape his nose once more, shifting just as she had before attempting to lift him from his seated position. When he realized he was naked, he seemed to change his mind and make a mild noise of discomfort. What the hell? Why am I naked? Yelped the blonde, grabbing the blanket that threatened to spill and reveal his naked form to the world, causing Madara to roll her eyes and relax slightly at the sight of his childish behavior. A hardened killer didn't care about decency, and given that his only hand was currently occupied with keeping his blanket held up around his waist, she doubted he'd attack her. You were dying and covered in blood when I found you. I couldn't really clean your wounds if you kept your clothes on, could I? Madara quirked her left brow at his line of questioning, as if trying to grasp the folly of his actions. Her guest, snapping his mouth shut, seemed to accept her response and relax slightly under her gaze, but not enough to show comfort in his presence. Something about his posture made her nervous, as if she were waiting for the moment he proved to be a threat. I'll ask again, who are you? The ebony-haired matriarch inquired. I hope I didn't just waste a week of my life caring for an enemy. The blonde's face remained puzzled, becoming even more pronounced as it shifted towards incredulity. What the hell? The blonde murmured to himself, shifting uncomfortably beneath her gaze, his eyes almost anywhere but in her direction. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, nice to meet you. You're an Uzumaki? Madara asked, shifting into a combat position at the same time, either of her legs spreading a little wider to compensate for her lower center of gravity. You certainly don't look like one. Hey, whoa, what's wrong with being an Uzumaki, huh? You don't see me fighting you because you're a Uchiha. The blonde took a step back and motioned as if to raise his hands to show he meant no harm, clearly forgetting about the blanket at his waist covering his modesty. I know I don't have my mom's pretty hair, but that ain't mean nothing. Was he sulking? Madara tilted her head slightly as she got another eyeful, a slightly lewd grin on her face despite the situation. She paused for a moment before nodding, as if she agreed with him. You subscribe to the Senju's line of thought, then? Madara mocked, despite feeling a little more at ease due to his defense of his clan's name. What? You think we can have peace after we've spent the last 100 years killing each other? It was a loaded question, meant to determine whether he was a Senju member or not. The chances of a renegade Uzumaki wandering around the land of fire were slim. According to what she knew, the Uzumaki were kind to their own and pretty happy in their own little paradise island, which they selfishly guarded with their lives. Why would an Uzumaki not want to be in the company of other Uzumaki? He obviously knew what he was, and if his naive modesty was to be believed, he appeared almost as childish and soft as the other Uzumaki she had heard of in the past. Naruto, as he revealed his name, appeared to think about her words before shrugging and nodding, his one hand still raised in a disarming manner while his stump of a limb mimicked the same position. Of course, peace is preferable to war. Who wants to make enemies when you can make friends? His response confirmed her suspicions once more. A Senju-aligned Uzumaki with absolutely monstrous chakra reserves, enhanced healing, and the pacifistic nature she had come to expect from Hashirama himself. This did not bode well for her, but it gave that tiny spark of hope within her, ignited by Hashirama, a boost in strength. That is exactly what I'd expect Hashirama to say. Madara sighed, shrugging her shoulders. So what happened to you? Looks like you got chewed up and spit out by one of the Biju. Did the Senju nod of your back? Every question she posed was loaded to the gills. It was almost as if Naruto had no idea what kind of information he was disclosing when he spoke. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. Madara could tell from his reserves and the scars on his body, particularly the one over his heart, that he was no stranger to near-death experiences and conflict. He was so sure of himself that he didn't bother concealing his words or intentions, much like Hashirama. Tobirama, on the other hand, would have dissected and twisted her questions until he could answer in a way that left no room for the truth. Naruto paused his response, and Madara could see the grimace on his face as he remembered what had caused him to be so wounded. I don't really want to talk about that. It was obviously something very personal, as he seemed to withdraw into himself when he thought about whatever had so deeply wounded him. It was most likely not a failed mission, because shinobi rarely took failure so personally that they would withdraw into themselves at the thought of it, unless it was absolutely necessary. But what kind of mission could he have undertaken that would have sent him flying far and high enough in the land of fire to create a crater that size? Within the next 50 miles outside of the Senju, there were no civilian towns unaligned with a shinobi clan. and no reports of a Uchiha other than herself or her sister Izumi who could have caused such an obviously powerful shinobi to become as wounded as he was. That left very few shinobi in the immediate vicinity who could have been potential enemies. If his personality was truly that bubbly, the only thing that could have upset such a lively person would have been the loss of a loved one or maybe a betrayal. Her pupils constricted slightly. Betrayal. Perhaps it was a bad habit to jump to the worst case scenario, but Madara did just that. If he had been betrayed and was in Uzumaki, it was probably for the best that she kept him out of the hands of the Senju. But why would the Uzumaki betray one of their own? Or were the Senju the ones who betrayed him? Madara murmured to herself after reaching her conclusion as a cold sensation bloomed in her stomach and a burning sensation pricked her heart. I see. To think they'd betray one of their own. When she snapped her ebony eyes upwards to meet his ocean blues, her guest clearly heard her and flinched. You are safe here, in this room. There are seals on the walls that have well hidden your presence for the last week. Madara seemed to misread his admissions and drew her own conclusions, leaving him no room for argument as she pointed to the far right of the room. There are robes there that should fit you if you would like to dress yourself. I will be back shortly with something for you to eat. Please don't go anywhere. Wabadai the blonde struggled to form a sentence as he tried to comprehend the shift in their conversation, staring in bemusement as Madara lowered her aggressive stance and adopted a tone he couldn't quite place. After the mention of food caught up with him, the loud protests of his stomach interrupted any further protests from him. How long had it been since he last ate? She was gone before he could say anything else, leaving him to stand in silence as he tried to process the entire conversation and meeting. Damn, she's good, Kurama murmured through the link he and Naruto shared, digesting Naruto's conversation with a clearly female Madara Uchiha. It had been a disaster from the beginning. What the hell happened? Naruto questioned his partner as he stared at the door Madara freaking Uchiha had just walked out of, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Was that Madara, or just a girl who looked and acted like him? Kurama couldn't tell at first, but after a minute of research, he discovered the unsettling truth. That was Madara, who is now apparently a teenage female. Her chakra was unmistakable. I believe that little shit you called brother sent us back in time. But is it our past, or another? Because the Madara I knew was a jerk. Naruto argued his point, frustration welling up inside him as he gradually came to a realization. This isn't our history, and Madara is still a teen. There was a brief moment of silence between the two before Kurama broke it with a light growl. Listen, brat, I think I have an idea. I'm listening. Naruto replied a moment later, his voice even more depressed than before at the prospect of not having a home to return to. I know this contradicts what I said earlier, but I think staying around Madara will be our best bet for staying safe, at least for the time being. What on earth makes you say that? Do you remember the kicking I had to put up with at her palm? The Jinchuriki of Kurama was not amused by the suggestion, attempting to cross his arms in protest only to have one arm cross his chest. Not happening. Kurama, listen to me. We have no allies here, nowhere to flee if things go wrong. Kurama was adamant in his suggestion, and his firm tone was enough to halt any further protests from his container, at least any with any real heart behind them. There is no Konoha. Think about it. If she hasn't killed you yet, and if she didn't kill you when you admitted you were in Uzumaki, what makes you think she'd go get food for you unless there was something she wanted in exchange for helping you? Who says she isn't going to stab me in the back like Sasuke? Naruto couldn't even think his name, his throat closing in on itself when he tried. Okay, Kurama, I'll just play along. Please tell me what you believe we should do. What else was there for him to do? If there was no Konoha, there would be no Hokage to report to, so his loyalty was only to himself and the Biju by default. Biju is. Brat, don't even think about it. We haven't recovered enough yet. Kurama grumbled within him, knowing exactly where his container's line of thought would lead him. As much as Kurama wishes to see his brothers and sisters again, his own position in this universe raises far too many questions for him to answer for the time being. Not to mention that in this universe, Kurama was just as likely to try to kill him as he was to listen, believing that all humans were born imperfect and evil. Yeah, you're right. Naruto wanted to argue, but he knew deep down that he wasn't prepared for another cataclysmic battle if any of the 9 Biju refused to cooperate. With my current stiffness, I'd only be able to handle Shukaku, and that might be pushing it. Just play along with whatever she wants from us for now. Obviously, don't let her know I exist, and get her to agree not to use the Sharingan on you. Those are the only things I ask until we can figure out a better plan. Kurama eventually fell silent. Neither thought it was an ideal situation, but they would try to make the best of it while they were under Madara Uchiha's so-called hospitality. or rather, Madara Uchiha is his female counterpart. As he tried to wrap his head around the strange dimension Sasuke had sent him to, Naruto got a severe headache. This bitter loser couldn't accept defeat and cheated me out of my victory. Kurama agreed silently with his host, not feeling the need to comment on the obvious. His host had been duped out of his victory, and the two were now paying the price. The tailed beast couldn't stop the vicious grin that crossed his face at an illicit thought he kept to himself because he didn't want Naruto to figure out his nefarious scheme. His host had an odd habit of turning former enemies into friends, so why not take advantage of the obvious opportunity to convert Madara while they still could? Sasuke felt he was going to scupper Naruto's chances of becoming Hokage. Kurama, on the other hand, was going to rob Sasuke of his chance at life. Hopefully, literally speaking. Get dressed, please, unless you enjoy flashing that prick Madara. Kurama laughed at the young shinobi's incoherent sputtering and subsequent quick actions. Izumi Uchiha couldn't help but keep a close eye on her elder sister. She had been acting suspiciously for a week now, spending more and more time secluded in a room she had sealed off to only allow herself entrance. That wasn't entirely suspicious, as Madara had grown increasingly dissatisfied with her clan's progress during her tenure as clan head. The items she had recovered and later brought to the room were suspicious. Madara had gone through her deceased father's belongings, specifically his clothing, about 3 days prior, only to return with a few sets of robes that she had eyeballed for quite a few minutes before deciding on. What possible reason could Madara have for requiring male clothing? Izumi hoped her elder sister wasn't attempting to pass herself off as a man, even in the comfort of her own home. It didn't bode well for her femininity or mental toughness, while she was aware that Madara was far from the most endowed of women, but that didn't mean she should ignore what made her a woman in the name of strength. After another day or so, Izumi was confident that her elder sister had not begun to pretend she was male, as she had begun, dare she say, prettying herself. It wasn't much, but Madara's only remaining sibling could see the light shade of charcoal she had used as eyeliner. Around the same time, the elder Uchiha began wearing robes around the house instead of her usual black pants and turtleneck mid-sleeve shirt. When did Madara freaking Uchiha start wearing robes that stopped mid-thigh? So the younger Uchiha sibling observed Madara's actions for several days afterward, her actions remaining enigmatic. It was for this reason that she found herself standing outside the small kitchen that the two were afforded as the top-ranking members of their clan, both having moved from their now-deceased father's home. Nothing out of the ordinary about Madara preparing food for herself, especially since it was dinner time. But each of the sisters usually prepared their own meals, and here she was, preparing too. So, Madara, do you have a visitor? Given the 2 meals, it made sense, and it explained why she would require male robes denoting status within the clan. But it also begged the question of who that guest could have been, who was important enough to warrant a set of robes proclaiming Uchiha affiliation who didn't already have their own. If Madara needed clothing for a clansman, she would have approached a tailor and had it delivered, but she did not. Instead, she had gathered Tajima Uchiha's robes from when he was engaged to their mother, Makoto Uchiha. Engagement wear was typically worn for a few months by either the clan head or their chosen partner if the leader of the Uchiha was female at the time, a small bit of tradition that their family had followed for generations. This tidbit of information, combined with Madara preparing a meal for 2, prompted Izumi to reach an unexpected but not unwelcome conclusion. Did Madara finally find someone with whom she wanted to settle down? Even after having sworn off romance for several years, Izumi was pleased with her reasoning, but she was also suspicious. As a result, she watched her sister enter the sealed-off room with a critical eye, seemingly unaware that she was being watched so closely, or perhaps completely unconcerned. It wasn't unusual for Izumi to keep a close eye on her elder sister, after all. Who else was going to keep her in check? Perhaps she had relaxed her duties too much, as Madara seemed to have decided that playing house in secret was a good way to conduct herself. Madara was still trying to process what she had learned from her guest, Naruto Uzumaki, if he was to be believed. The Senju not only had Uzumaki among them, but they were willing to betray their own. What would stop them from doing the same to the Uchiha if they were willing to do the same to Naruto? Was Hashirama aware of what his family had done? Was it Naruto's little brother, Tobirama, who had injured and betrayed him? Were there more Uzumaki in the Land of Fire that she wasn't aware of? She hadn't expected the Senju to seek help from their cousin clan, especially given how lax the alliance between the two clans had become over the last decade. Trade between the two had almost slowed to a halt, and the elusive clan of Redheads saw little reason to bother with the clans of the Land of Fire, especially given their proximity to the lands of Earth, Water, and Lightning. She was too preoccupied with her thoughts to notice Izumi's heavy gaze peering through the doorway, the crawling sensation overtaking her spine masking the usual nagging feelings she would get when being watched. Madara prepared her and Naruto's meal in silence, steaming some rice and making a simple sauce to accompany it. Despite her combat skills, Madara did not consider herself a cook and relied on the bare necessities to survive, usually relying on meals from a vending stall within the compound on nights she didn't feel like cooking. The ability to burn water was uncommon, but Madara possessed it. Madara quickly passed her little sister Izumi in the hall with nary a word before returning to the room where her cute little guest had been kept, preparing 2 dishes with the rice and sauce and grabbing 2 pairs of chopsticks in a hurry. She hadn't expected to see Naruto struggling to close the robe properly while still being able to tie the belt provided, but she hadn't considered his missing limb while going through her father's clothes. Madara couldn't help but snort in amusement as she set the 2 dishes of rice and sauce to the side before sliding the door shut behind her with her right foot, completely unaware of the peeping gaze she had just blocked from view. "Here, let me assist you before you give up and tear those robes to shreds," Madara said, causing her visitor to look up with a feral look in his eyes before attempting to cover himself properly. The long-haired woman took 3 quick steps across the room, allowing her left hand to lightly trace along his shoulder and the back of his neck as she stepped behind him. Naruto stiffened under her touch, most likely in preparation for an attack but also as a primal reaction. Madara wrapped her arms around him from behind and pulled the folds of her father's old engagement robes closed around his naked body, his muscles flexing taut beneath her lingering touch. She couldn't help but smile savagely as she noticed another part of his body stiffen even more as she leaned forward just enough for her short stature to allow her head to rest near the crook of his neck, near his left ear. Madara silently relished the feel of his body reacting as it did now that he was conscious, grabbing the ends of his robe's belt in one hand before passing one end to the hand that was currently holding his robes closed. Another moment passed, and the robes were tied closed, allowing her guest to relax slightly, his decency restored. Madara let her hands linger a little longer, her breath still tracing the crook of his neck and ear. "You can relax, I don't bite." Very much. The crimson fountain that colored his cheeks and neck was just too perfect, her teasing once more succeeding as any composure the blonde had gathered melted away as he stammered a response. She had a feeling she was going to enjoy convincing Naruto of his new position in life, because she had decided one thing right then and there. Madara intended to keep him. The silence between the two was unsettling to say the least, especially for the blonde Jinchuriki. His host seemed perfectly content to sit across from him and nibble on her rice, her gaze almost never leaving him for more than a second. He hadn't touched his food yet, instead staring down at it in slight frustration before deciding not to sully his already shattered pride by asking for help eating, which was exactly what his host seemed to want. While he was mostly ambidextrous, he had never mastered eating with chopsticks with his left hand. The blonde would-be savior formed an arm of pure chakra where his right arm used to be, using quite a bit of his still taxed chakra reserves. It was a rough design that didn't exactly match the size and shape he was going for at first, but he soon made the oversized limb shrink down to more or less match the length and proportions of his left arm. He didn't notice Madara pause her grazing to stare at him almost slack-jawed, her expression changing in seconds from amusement to wonder. Instead, he gingerly grabbed the chopsticks with his false hand, using the same caution he used when dealing with Kurama's chakra. The task of creating and controlling the limb, on the other hand, was far too simple for Naruto, causing him to pause and cast a sidelong glance at the limb. "It's probably because of father's young seal, you imbecile. Did you already forget?" Kurama snorted, surprised by how quickly his host seemed to forget the generous gift bestowed upon him by the Sage of Six Paths. "His seals are more than flesh deep, remember that." "How do you do that?" Any retort he might have had for Kurama was cut short when Madara spoke up across from him, causing him to lift his gaze from his food perhaps a little too quickly, the room spinning slightly. "It's difficult to explain without some intimate knowledge of young chakra." Naruto eventually hedged while refusing to make direct eye contact, instead keeping his gaze somewhere between her eyes and ears at all times. "You aren't going to just use your Sharingan to figure it out. Is that permission to observe you, then?" Madara was quick to read between the lines, though she did feel the need to defend herself against the hidden accusation. "Of course, I don't use my Sharingan on my guests without permission. That would be rude." This admission only confused Naruto, who shrugged his shoulders after a few more moments of silence. "As long as you promise not to use your Manjikaiwu on me again in the future, go ahead." Madara stiffened slightly at the casual mention of the ostensibly secret second stage of the Sharingan. having been unaware that anyone outside of her clan knew the name, let alone the implications. How did you learn about the Manji Kyowu? You're not the first Uchiha I've met, you know. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the question. The other one that I knew, he was skilled with his eyes, awfully proud of him. As he should be, if he had awakened the Manji Kyowu. What is his name? Madara seemed far too eager to know his name, actually leaning forward slightly when Naruto admitted, perhaps I'm familiar with him. Being clan head and all. I doubt it. His name was Sasuke, Naruto said, looking down at his food with an almost haunted expression on his face before snapping out of it just as quickly. He's already gone. Thank the sage for small miracles. Kurama snorted, disgusted and amused at the same time, a sort of in-between that Kurama usually towed in terms of his emotional state. Madara was hesitant to press him further on the subject because of his certainty. It was clearly a very personal one for him, and he was correct when she discovered herself unfamiliar with the name. His reaction was genuine, and she could almost taste his sadness in the air, so she decided to change the subject to something more pleasant rather than press him for information on a deceased man with her surname. The subject of his chakra arm, in particular, piqued her interest. So you don't mind if I observe you with my base sharing and as long as I promise not to use my Manji Kyowu. Madara felt the need to confirm his agreement one more time before taking any action, especially when given the opportunity to study something as complex as pure yang chakra manipulation. That was a nearly exclusive Uzumaki art, as the only two senju in recent generations with any meaningful amount of skill in the elusive arts were Hashirama and Tobirama. Because of the Uzumaki's reclusive nature, it had been a few years since a Uchiha had come into contact with someone who had actual experience with yang chakra manipulation. Madara most likely being the first. There was no doubt in her mind that the arm Naruto was displaying was far and above the average expectancy of someone their age, making the opportunity all the more appealing. Madara pushed more chakra into her eyes than the Sharingan's first stage required, but not enough to push them into their second stages just yet. She almost regretted it as her coal-colored eyes bled red and the blonde figure in front of her, already shrouded in chakra visible to the naked eye, became so bright she was almost convinced he'd spontaneously combusted and become a second sun. There were not enough words in the elemental nation's language to adequately describe what she was seeing. The yang chakra within her guest's body was twisting, turning, and writhing, essentially forming musculature and bone out of condensed chakra so thick she doubted she could cut it with a kunai. The various shades of green, orange, blue, red, and yellow that comprised each individual fiber of chakra made musculature appeared to mimic the chakra network that was present within every human being, as well as the capillaries and vessels used for blood delivery. These chakra threads perfectly connected to the chakra pathways within the stump of his right arm, blending together so well that Madara couldn't tell where his natural arm ended and the chakra construct began under the preview of her Sharingan. It was both humbling and enlightening at the same time, because Madara knew without a doubt that if she emulated the blonde before her by enhancing her own musculature in this manner, she could increase her physical strength and endurance by orders of magnitude. How did you learn such abilities, if you don't mind my asking? Madara eventually asks idly, her eyes still soaking in the sights of her guest manipulating his chakra in ways she had never imagined possible. Is this some sort of Uzumaki technique like the fabled chakra chains? Naruto almost immediately shook his head in the negative before answering her question to the best of his ability. No, this is all me. Well, mostly me. I'm a sage, so this sort of thing comes with the territory. I didn't even know about the chakra chains until maybe a month ago. Sage, truly? Madara leaned forward almost excitedly upon hearing such an admission. So you also wield a summoning contract, then? There was a brief pause before her guest's improved expression fell and became dejected once more. I did, but I'm not sure if I can still successfully summon them anymore, Naruto eventually reasoned, his voice faltering slightly as he spoke. I don't think they'll answer my call if I try, and I don't think it'd be a good idea to risk pissing off the folks of Mount Myaboku. You were a toad summoner. Madara was intrigued to learn that the toads had permitted such a thing. Having learned from her own summons, the Crow clan, that Mount Myaboku was a no-go unless you wanted a quick and painful death. I had no idea the toads forged a contract. Yeah, there were only a few of us, and they're super awesome, but being forced to eat bugs for a month. Blech. The blonde made a shivering face before digging into his rice with gusto. I'd rather eat vegetables than bugs, and vegetables are disgusting. You must have hit your head a little too hard last week. Vegetables are awesome, Madara mused before quickly returning to the topic at hand. So if you are truly a sage, Then you must have a great grasp on the usage of nature chakra, yes. I mean, yes, I'm not one to brag, but I doubt anyone else around here can handle as much as I can at any given time outside of, say, the Biju. Chakra manipulation is sort of my thing, you know. Naruto reached up to scratch his chin with his left hand idly while playing with his chopsticks with his chakra-constructed hand. I didn't start studying Fuinjutsu until 2 years ago, so, you know, that's unusual for an Uzumaki, Madara observed calmly. Were you raised beyond Uzashio? Yep, born and raised here in the land of fire, Naruto admits smoothly and without hesitation. I didn't meet another Uzumaki until my cousin Karin, who, now that I think about it, wasn't much of an Uzumaki either. Despite his odd verbal tics and vernacular, the current head of the Uchiha clan was inclined to believe him. Madara nods slowly in acceptance and finishes the last of her rice as she digests the freely offered information, the implication of which bothers her slightly. How did her guest end up associated with the Senju if he hadn't learned from the Uzumaki of Uzashio, and had very little to do with his family, according to his admission? Was he even connected to the Senju? Madara saw no reason not to address the Biju in the room after how easily he had answered the rest of her questions. Your entire life, huh? Were you raised by the Senju then, perhaps? The matriarch of the Uchiha inquired, taking a calm sip of tea as if she hadn't just outright asked where his allegiances lay. After all, they are your cousin clan. Nah, the only Senju I know is, well, she's gone too now, I guess. Damn. Naruto trails off again, his cerulean-colored eyes a little vacant as he stares somewhere over Madara's shoulder for a moment before his gaze sharpens again. I'm an orphan, so. Yeah, I basically raised myself. What about you? What about me? Madara asks, slightly perplexed by the seemingly simple question. Well, I mean, were you raised here in the land of fire? Naruto inquires, unsure of himself. I mean, I don't really know too much about the Uchiha, so. Madara snorts slightly in disbelief, having never met a man as skilled as Naruto who also seemed to be slightly lacking in common sense. Yes, Naruto, the Uchiha are from the land of fire, Madara admits, her eyes crinkling slightly as she covers her mouth with a closed palm. Have you been living under a rock? Or do you just not pay attention to what goes on around you? Yeah, laugh it up, Naruto says, knowing Madara wasn't being malicious. Anyway, thank you for helping me out instead of. Well, it really means a lot to me. I would have been a goner if it wasn't for you. If there's anything I can do to repay you, just let me know. Madara is taken aback by the sincerity of his words, his expression and body language, as well as the genuine emotion shining in his eyes and echoing in his words, painted a vivid picture for her to decipher with her Sharingan. Madara couldn't remember the last time anyone had been so honest with her. There were no lies to discern, no half-truths, falsehoods, or double meanings. Naruto was obviously not like the other shinobi. He didn't appear nearly as cold and twice removed from the world through a facade and a mask as even she did. Someone as pure as she was not suited to the life of a hardened killer. Obviously, it was now up to her to protect that innocence, especially given everything that had been said and not said. Just as she is about to respond, both she and her guest feel a monstrous chakra signature appear somewhere in the periphery of their sensorial range, based on the way he suddenly jerks upright with alertness. Of course, Madara recognizes the signature right away, but Naruto does not, based on the troubled expression on his face. I was wondering when that fool would show up. Madara sighs as she rises from her seated position and stretches languidly. Let me. Then Naruto was gone like the wind, leaving the sealed doorway to the room leading further into the compound open. Hashirama couldn't help but frown in confusion as he touched down outside of the crater left by some sort of impact somewhere near the borders of Uchiha and Senju territory. The chakra lingering in the ground and air around the site was unlike anything he had ever felt before. The amount of yang and nature chakra still lingering in the area was mind-boggling, to the point where he could almost taste it. Instead of going to the Summons realm to practice his senjutsu, this crater was about to become his new favorite training location. If only he could persuade Tobirama to stop acting paranoid. Sorry, Tobai-chan, I just don't see it. There is no way the Uchiha are responsible for this unless Mada-chan has been holding back against me lately. Hashirama sighs and crosses his arms, staring down at the massive crater. This is the work of a sage. You said this impact site is already a week old. A sage? How would? Nature chakra, of course. Tobirama grumbles under his breath. You really need to teach me that little trick you do. I'm supposed to be the better sensor. Yes, this happened a little over a week ago now. And have you finally beaten me during our sparring? I don't think so, Hashirama exclaims dramatically. Pointing to his younger brother, you're already a damn cheater. What makes you think I'm willing to teach you my super secret technique? It's obviously not all that exclusive anymore if there's another sage out there, let alone so close to our home. Tobirama says, his tone slightly heated. This is serious. Hashirama. Relax, Tobai-chan. Tell you what, I'll go over to Mata Compound-chan's and annoy the guards until she inevitably tries to chase me away. Hashirama grins goofily at the prospect of annoying the Uchiha compound guards. Then I'll ask her if she knows anything while we dance. Does that sound good? You know what? You're going to do it anyway, so does my opinion really matter? Tobirama asks almost childishly. His lips drawn up into a sneer, his sharp crimson eyes locked on Hashirama's chocolate brown. Just go, I'll keep watch until you get back from flirting with your secret lover. She's not my secret lover. Hashirama yells angrily behind his brother's back. I love Mito, dang it. Come back here so I can teach you the ways of friend Fu. When it became clear that Tobirama wasn't going to return and willingly allow Hashirama to beat some friendship into him with his fists, the eldest of the Senju brothers huffs angrily before turning his gaze east, where he knew the Uchiha compound remained despite Madara threatening to move her clan to the land of water if he didn't stop screwing with the guards. The brown-haired shinobi clad in crimson armor absorbed some of the ambient nature chakra lingering in the ground beneath his feet before taking off towards the Uchiha compound, a wide grin plastered on his face the entire time. That grin grew even wider as he began to pick up strong signals of the same chakra signature that had been left in the crater that Hashirama had quickly claimed as his own. When he felt the warm chakra signature suddenly spike with an absolutely monstrous amount of nature chakra before breaking away from beside Madara, whose chakra signature was unmistakable to him after years of fighting with and against her, that grin threatened to split his face in two. The source of the incredibly powerful chakra arrived outside of the Uchiha compound, causing the many guards present to groan in annoyance at the mere sight of him. The eldest of the Senju brothers couldn't help but let out an impressed whistle as he carefully examined the blonde-haired figure with strange whisker marks on his cheeks. You're a strange-looking Uchiha, my friend. Then he was surrounded by a swarm of blondes, each carrying a piece of the nature chakra that the first had been accumulating internally, and each looking positively murderous. Say that again, and I'll break your stupid-looking face. I'm in Uzumaki T Tebayo, don't you forget. Hashirama begins to sweat a little as the blonde casually throws chakra around, so much so that his hair was practically standing on end due to the sheer volume in the air now. If a fight breaks out right now, he may have to call in the big guns. It might have been best to defuse the situation before it became volatile. That sounded like a good plan. Oh, my bad. Is this the wrong time to say I come in peace? Hashirama raises both hands to show he is unarmed, blinking owlishly. That's what I thought, you dumb-looking asshole. One of the clones murmured just loud enough for Hashirama to hear, clearly annoyed at being referred to as a strange-looking Uchiha. He sounded exactly like in Uzumaki. To be sure, most, including his soon-to-be wife Mito, were naturally vulgar.
So this was the end of this movie. If you wanna watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, we weeb offline.